He was 18 years old when he inherited a ruin on a frozen lake, and what he discovered there would change not just his future, but the entire story of his past. If you've ever felt like you were given nothing but a broken-down version of a life, I need you to stick with me. Hit subscribe, because this is a place for stories like that. This is my story. The silence in Carol's house was a specific kind of silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was the sterile, humming quiet of expensive appliances and thick carpets designed to swallow sound, to swallow life. For the 2 years since my father's funeral, that silence had been my constant companion, a roommate who never paid rent but took up all the space. On the morning of my 18th birthday, it felt louder than ever, pressing in on me from all sides. I sat at the polished granite island in the kitchen, a single, unlit candle stuck in a grocery store muffin in front of me. Carol wouldn't allow a real cake. Too many crumbs. She slid a cardboard box across the island. It was a banker's box, sealed with yellowing tape, my father's familiar, blocky handwriting scrawled across the top. Leo. Happy birthday, Leo, she said, her voice as smooth and cold as the countertop. She didn't look at me. She was busy wiping away an invisible smudge with a microfiber cloth. As you know, today you are legally an adult. The arrangements your father made for your care under my roof are now concluded. Arrangements. That's what she called the last 2 years of my life. An arrangement. Like I was a piece of furniture she'd been storing. I looked at the box. It wasn't a gift. It was a severance package. Inside, I knew, were the fragments of my father she deemed unimportant enough to keep. Old paperbacks, a few faded photographs, his favorite worn-out flannel shirt that probably still smelled like him, like sawdust and coffee. Then she placed a thick manila envelope on top of the box. It was heavy, official. This is for you too, she said. Your inheritance. Histoire de hair. My father had been a carpenter, a good one, but he'd had a string of bad luck before he died. A workshop fire, a few clients who never paid. Carol had made it very clear, over and over, that he'd left nothing but debts. Debts she had so graciously handled. Her version of the story was that she'd saved me from poverty, taken me in out of the goodness of her heart. Hearing her say the word inheritance felt like a trick. What is it? I asked. My voice was rough. I hadn't used it yet today. It's the deed, she said, finally turning to look at me, a thin, triumphant smile on her face. To his family's old property up north. The ice house, she said the words ice house, like she was saying the dumpster or the swamp. It's been abandoned for 50 years. The taxes are past due, the roof is probably gone, and it's miles from anything. It's worthless, but it's yours. Your father was very specific in his will. He wanted you to have it, her smile widened. Now you have a place of your own. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just an eviction, it was a performance. She was kicking me out and dressing it up as my father's last wish. She was giving me a pile of rotting wood and calling it a home. I felt a hot surge of anger, but it was quickly swamped by the familiar, cold tide of helplessness that had defined my life in this house. Arguing with Carol was like punching water. You just got tired. You have until 5 o'clock this evening to gather your things, she continued, turning back to her cleaning. A taxi will be here to take you to the bus station. I've paid for your ticket. A ticket to where? To Northwood. It's the closest town to your property. After that, you're on your own. You're an adult now, Leo. It's time you learned to be responsible for yourself. The box felt heavy in my arms as I carried it up to my room. My room. It had never felt like mine. The walls were a neutral beige she'd chosen. The furniture was a matching set she'd ordered from a catalog. There were no posters, no pictures, nothing of me on the walls. It was a guest room a guest had overstayed in for 2 years. I packed a single duffel bag, a few changes of clothes, the worn sweatshirt that had been my dad's, a book. I put the photos from the box into the side pocket. Then I sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed and opened the manila envelope. Inside was a tangle of legal documents. A deed, thick with the strange, dense language of property law. A property tax bill, stamped in red. Final notice. And a single, folded piece of paper. It was a letter, but not from my father. It was from his lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, dated a week after my father's death. It was addressed to me. Leo, it began, per your father's instructions, I am holding this letter for you until your 18th birthday. He created a separate set of final instructions with me, apart from mine what your stepmother has executed. He was a meticulous man. Please call me at your earliest convenience. There are matters we need to discuss concerning the Northwood property. Do not sign anything or make any decisions until we have spoken. Your father, above all else, wanted you to be safe. A strange flicker of something, not quite hope, but something like it, stirred in my chest. A meticulous man. Carol had always painted him as a dreamer, a failure, someone who couldn't manage his own affairs. But meticulous was the right word. I remembered watching him in his workshop, the way he measured a piece of wood 3 times before making a single cut, the way his tools were always cleaned and hung in their precise places. He wasn't chaotic. He was careful. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. The taxi was due in an hour. I looked around the beige room at the life that had never been mine and felt a sudden, sharp sense of clarity. Carol thought she was sending me into exile. She thought she was handing me a burden, a final testament to my father's failure. But maybe, just maybe, he had handed me a key. The bus ride was a long, slow journey from one world to another. The manicured suburbs of the city bled into strip malls, then into flat, open farmland that eventually gave way to rolling hills and thick forests. The further north we went, the more the trees changed, the evergreens becoming denser, taller, standing like sentinels against the pale autumn sky. I watched the world go by through the grimy window, the rhythmic hum of the engine a constant drone. For the first time in 2 years, I was truly alone. Not the curated, supervised loneliness of Carol's house, but a vast, untethered solitude. It was terrifying. It was also the first time I had felt a breath of freedom. I thought about my dad. I tried to conjure his face, his voice, but the memories were getting fuzzy, worn smooth by grief. I remembered his hands best, calloused and strong, always smelling faintly of cedar. He could build anything. A bookshelf, a dining table, a whole house. He tried to teach me, but I was clumsy, impatient. Patience, Leo, he'd say, his voice calm. Measure twice, cut once. It's not just about the wood. It's about the respect you show it. Carol had sold all his tools. She said they were a painful reminder. I think she just wanted the money. What kind of man leaves his only son a worthless, collapsing building? The question echoed in my mind with the rhythm of the bus. Was Carol right? Was this his final, tragic mistake? Or was Mr. Davies right? Was he a meticulous man whose plan I just couldn't see yet? The letter in my pocket felt like a tangible weight, a single point of certainty in a sea of unknowns. Do not sign anything. The bus pulled into Northwood just as the sun was setting, casting long, deep shadows across the single main street. It wasn't so much a town as a collection of buildings huddled together for warmth against the encroaching wilderness. A general store with a flickering neon sign, a diner with condensation on the windows, a gas station, and a few houses with smoke curling from their chimneys. The air was different here. It was cold, sharp, and clean, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. It felt ancient. The bus driver opened the door with a pneumatic hiss. "End of the line, kid," he said not unkindly. I stepped out, my duffel bag in one hand, the banker's box in the other. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing around a bend, leaving me in an almost absolute silence. There was no one on the street. It was as if the whole town had drawn its breath and was holding it, waiting. For what? I didn't know. I felt impossibly small, a tiny, insignificant figure under a vast, star-filled sky. My property, my so-called inheritance, was, according to the map on my phone, another 4 miles down a side road that branched off on the edge of town. There were no more buses. No taxis. I started walking. The road out of town quickly turned from pavement to gravel. The woods pressed in on both sides, the trees a dark, impenetrable wall. The moon was bright enough to see by, painting the road in shades of silver and gray. The only sounds were the crunch of my footsteps on the gravel and the distant call of a loon from a lake I couldn't see. The box was awkward and heavy, its cardboard edges digging into my fingers. After a mile, my arms ached. I set the box down and sat on it, my breath clouding in the cold air. This was it. This was the start of my adult life. Stranded on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, with a box of memories and a deed to a ruin. A wave of despair washed over me, so intense it was almost nauseating. Carol had won. She had successfully erased me from her life and dumped me in a place where I would surely fail. I pulled out my phone. The battery was at 15%. There was one bar of service. I thought about calling Mr. Davies, but what would I say? I'm here. I'm lost. I am scared. It felt too pathetic. Instead, I pulled up the map again. A small blue dot pulsed on a lonely road next to a patch of blue labeled Blackwood Lake. I was close. I picked up the box and kept walking. Another 20 minutes of trudging down the gravel road, and I saw it. A narrow, overgrown lane branching off to the left, marked by a rusted metal post with the faded numbers of the address. The lane was more like a trail, choked with weeds and fallen branches. I pushed my way through, the branches scratching at my face and clothes. And then the trees opened up and I saw it. The ice house. It stood on a small clearing that sloped down to the shore of a vast, dark lake. The moonlight reflected off the water, a shimmering, silver path that stretched to the opposite shore. The building was enormous, far bigger than I had imagined. It was a giant, windowless cube of weathered gray wood, its roof sagging in the middle like the spine of an old beast. It wasn't just a shed, it was a fortress. It was built of thick, heavy timbers, and despite the decay, it radiated a sense of immense solidity. It wasn't beautiful, not in a conventional way, but it was imposing. It had a kind of grim, stubborn dignity. A single, heavy door was set into the front wall, secured with a massive, rusted padlock. The key Carol had thrown into the envelope was old and iron. I slid it into the lock. It resisted, grinding with rust and disuse. I put my shoulder into it, turning with all my weight, and with a deep, groaning crack, the lock gave way. The door swung inward on protesting hinges, opening into a vast, cathedral-like darkness. The air that poured out was ancient. It was a cold that felt like it had been trapped for a century, a pure, elemental cold mixed with the dry, sweet smell of sawdust and old wood. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut a narrow path through the darkness, revealing a space that was breathtaking in its scale. The ceiling was 3 stories high, crisscrossed with a complex web of massive wooden beams. The floor was covered in a thick blanket of sawdust, perfectly preserved in the cold, dry air. In the center of the room, the ghostly shapes of old machinery stood silent. Conveyor belts, pulleys, and giant iron tongs, all coated in a thick layer of dust. The walls were incredibly thick, maybe 2 or 3 feet, packed with sawdust for insulation. This place was built to hold the cold, to fight the sun, to preserve winter in the heart of summer. I walked deeper inside, my footsteps muffled by the sawdust. It was like stepping into a tomb or a time capsule. I ran my hand along one of the massive support beams. The wood was smooth, worn by time. My father's grandfather had built this place. He and his brothers had harvested ice from the lake in the winter, cutting it into huge blocks with saws and hauling it into this building to be stored and sold through the summer. It was a forgotten industry, a forgotten way of life. And my father had left it to me. I found a small, partitioned-off room in one corner. The office. It had a single, dusty window looking out over the lake. Inside was a simple wooden desk, a chair, and a row of empty filing cabinets. Everything was coated in the same fine layer of dust. It looked like someone had just walked out 50 years ago and never come back. I sat down in the chair, the wood groaning under my weight. I was exhausted, cold, and overwhelmed. I put my head in my hands. What was I supposed to do with this place? It was a museum of failure, a monument to a dead industry. But then my light caught something. On the wall behind the desk, one of the wooden planks looked different. It was a slightly lighter shade, and the nail heads weren't as rusted as the others. It was subtle. You would never notice it if you weren't looking. I remembered my dad, building a secret compartment in my closet for my treasures when I was a kid. He loved things like that. A good secret needs to be hidden in plain sight. Leo, he told me. My heart started to beat a little faster. I went over to the wall and pushed on the plank. Nothing. I tried to pry it with my fingers, but it was set tight. I looked around the office. In a corner, I found a rusty old pry bar. Using it, I wedged the tip into the seam and gently leveraged it. The board creaked, then popped loose. Behind it was a hollow space. And inside that space was a dark green metal box, the kind soldiers use for ammunition. It was heavy. I lifted it out and set on the desk, my hands trembling slightly. On the top, painted in careful white letters, was my name. Lau. I spent the rest of the night in the cold, dusty office, huddled in my dad's old sweatshirt for warmth. The box sat on the desk in front of me, a silent, heavy presence. It had a simple latch, not a lock. It was waiting for me, but I was afraid to open it, afraid of what I would find and what I wouldn't. What if it was just more of the same? More evidence of failure? More sadness? What if it was just empty? The first light of dawn began to filter through the grimy office window, a pale gray light that slowly illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. The lake outside was a sheet of silver, perfectly still, a thin layer of mist hovering just above its surface. The world felt new and quiet. It was time. My fingers were numb with cold as I fumbled with the latch. It sprang open with a sharp click. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was money. Stacks of it. Neat, paper-banded bundles of $100 bills. It wasn't a fortune, but to me, it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. Maybe $20,000. Enough to run away, to start over somewhere else, somewhere warm. Enough to prove Carol wrong. But beneath the money, there was something else. A thick stack of letters, tied together with twine, and a large, leather-bound journal. And under that, a collection of documents, blueprints, geological surveys, and copies of legal correspondence between my father and a company called Lionsgate Development. I picked up the stack of letters. The top one was in my father's handwriting. Leo, read these in order. And read them all before you do anything. I love you. Dad. My hands were shaking now. I untied the twine. The letters were dated, starting from just after my mom died, and continuing right up until a week before his own death. I opened the first one. My dearest Leo, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you have turned 18. It means my plan worked, at least this far. I'm sorry for all of this. I'm sorry for the secrets. I know you must be confused and probably angry. I know what Carol has likely told you about me, about my finances, about this place. I need you to listen to my side of the story now. I read for hours. The sun climbed higher in the sky, melting the mist off the lake, but I didn't notice. The world outside the ice house dissolved. There was only the rustle of the paper and my father's voice, speaking to me from across the years. The letters told a story I had never known, a story that dismantled every lie Carol had ever told me. He hadn't been a failure. He had been a fighter. After my mom passed, he decided to move us out of the city, to come back here, to the place he'd loved as a boy. He wanted to fix up the old ice house, not as a business, but as a home. A fortress, he called it, a place where we could be safe. But just as he was starting, Lionsgate Development came calling. They were buying up all the land around Blackwood Lake for a luxury golf resort and gated community. They made him an offer. He refused. They made a bigger one. He refused again. This land, he explained in his letters, was special. His grandfather had chosen this spot for a reason. The geological survey he'd included in the box showed it. The property sat on top of a massive deposit of lithium-rich spodumene, a mineral that was becoming incredibly valuable for batteries. The developers knew it. They weren't interested in the lakefront views. They were interested in the rock underneath. My great-grandfather had bought the mineral rights along with the land 100 years ago, a detail the developers had hoped my father would overlook. He hadn't. That's when the bad luck started. A zoning dispute filed by an anonymous neighbor. A sudden, inexplicable tax audit. Then the fire at his workshop in the city, which the fire marshal had ruled as faulty wiring, but which my dad was convinced was arson. It was a campaign of attrition designed to bleed him dry, to make him so desperate he would have no choice but to sell. And Carol was part of it. He'd met her a year after the pressure started. He thought she was a lifeline. He wrote about how he'd fallen for her, how he'd trusted her. But slowly, things started to go wrong in ways he couldn't explain. Documents would go missing from his desk. He would tell her about a legal strategy in confidence, and the next day, the developer's lawyers would have a countermove ready. He started to suspect. He set a trap, feeding her a piece of false information. It got back to Lionsgate within a day. She was working for them. Leo, he wrote, and I could feel the agony in his handwriting, the betrayal that must have shattered him. They paid her to get close to me, to find my weaknesses, to convince me to sell. When I confronted her, she admitted it. She said it was just business. I told her to get out. But the next day, I had my accident. His accident. He'd fallen from a scaffolding. The official story was that he'd slipped. But in his last letter, written from a hospital, he told the truth. The scaffolding had been tampered with. He knew he didn't have long, and he knew Carol would take everything. So I made a new will, Leo, with Mr. Davies. I left Carol the house, the savings, everything she thought she wanted. It was the only way to make her feel like she'd won, to make her leave you alone until you were old enough. But I left the ice house, the only thing that truly matters to you. It's not a ruin, son. It's a legacy. I've been secretly reinforcing the foundation, replacing the main support beams. I used the last of my money, the cash in this box, to pay for the materials. I did at night. It's solid. It's safe. Don't sell it. Whatever they offer you, don't sell it. This land is our story. It's your future. The journal in the box has all my research, all the proof you'll need about the mineral rights, about their harassment, everything. Mr. Davies knows what to do with it. This is your choice, son. You could take the money and walk away. I wouldn't blame you. Or you can stay. You can fight. You can finish what I started. Whatever you do, know that I never, ever gave up on you. This wasn't abandonment. It was the only way I knew how to protect you. I finished the last letter, and my whole body was shaking. I wasn't cold anymore. I was burning with a rage so pure it felt like it could melt the iron machinery in the room. Every memory of the last 2 years replayed in my mind, recast in this horrific new light. Carol's fake sympathy, her constant sighs about my father's mistakes, her calculated cruelty. It had all been a lie, a long, twisted, evil lie. And my dad, my quiet, gentle, carpenter father, he hadn't been a victim. He'd been a warrior, fighting a silent, lonely war against a pack of wolves. And he'd fought to his last breath. He hadn't left me a ruin. He'd left me a shield. He'd left me a mission. I cried then. For the first time since his funeral, I let myself truly cry. I cried for the father I had lost, and for the hero I had never known. I cried for the years of lies I had lived through. And I cried for the boy who had walked up this gravel road last night, terrified and alone, who no longer existed. He was gone. Something new, something harder and more determined, was taking his place. When the tears finally stopped, a profound calm settled over me. The path forward was terrifying, but it was clear. I wiped my eyes, stood up, and looked out the window at the lake. The sun was high in the sky now, glinting off the water. It was beautiful. It was mine. I took out my phone. The battery was at 5%. I had just enough time to make one call. I dialed the number from the letter. Davies' law office, a polite voice answered. "My name is Leo," I said, my own voice sounding strange and steady to my ears. "I need to speak with Mr. Davies. It's about my father. It's about the ice house." Mr. Davies was exactly what his letter had suggested, calm, precise, and professional. His voice over the phone was dry, but there was an undercurrent of warmth to it, of a deep, abiding loyalty. "Leo," he said, and I could hear the relief in his tone. "I've been expecting your call. I'm so sorry for what you've been through. Your father was a good man, a very good man." "I know," I said, looking around the dusty office. "I'm at the property now. I found the box." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Good," he said, the word carrying a weight of significance. "That's very good. Then you understand the situation." "I think so," I said. "I read the letters. All of them." "Then you know what's at stake," he said. Listen to me, Leo. Lionsgate Development has been waiting for you to turn 18. They believe that with your father gone, you'll be an easy target. They will approach you. They will offer you what seems like a lot of money to a young man with nothing. They will try to intimidate you. They will tell you this property is a tax burden, a worthless relic. Do not, under any circumstances, engage with them directly. You call me. Understand? Understand. Your father did most of the work for us, Mr. Davies continued, his voice picking up energy. The journal you have contains a meticulous record of every threat, every act of sabotage, every illegal pressure tactic they used. It's a roadmap to their entire conspiracy. With that, and the geological surveys, we don't just have a defensive position. We have grounds for a massive lawsuit. But we have to be smart. The first step is to secure your position. I've already prepared the paperwork to pay the back taxes from a trust your father set up with the last of his money. The property is safe for now. The next step is for you. What do I do? I asked, feeling a familiar flicker of helplessness. I was just a kid. This was a world of lawyers and corporations. For now, you hold your ground, Mr. Davies said firmly. Your physical presence on the property establishes residency. It makes it much harder for them to use legal loopholes to claim it's abandoned. Can you stay there? Is it habitable? I looked around the cavernous, cold space. Habitable was a strong word. Not really, I said, but I can make it work. Good, he said again. Your father was a resourceful man. I suspect you are too. I'm going to send you a package with some supplies and a proper burner phone. Don't use your commercial phone for anything important. They may be monitoring it. Just sit tight. Keep your head down, and read your father's journal. Know your enemy. I'll be in touch in a few days to discuss our first move. We hung up, and the silence of the ice house settled back around me. But it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't empty. It felt charged, full of purpose. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was a soldier, left in command of a remote, frozen outpost, with my father's last orders to hold the line. The first few days were the hardest. The cold was a physical entity, a constant pressure that seeped into my bones. I slept in my dad's old sweatshirt, wrapped in a dusty canvas tarp I found, my duffel bag for a pillow. The money my dad had left was a constant temptation. I could have been on a bus to anywhere, checked into a warm motel, eating a hot meal. Instead, I was eating cold cans of beans I'd bought at the general store in town, my only light from my phone's dying flashlight. I spent the daylight hours exploring every inch of my inheritance. My dad was right. The work he'd done was invisible from the outside, but it was everywhere. New joists sistered against old ones in the ceiling. The main support columns, which looked like ancient, weathered wood, were actually reinforced with steel rods he drilled and set inside them. The foundation, down by the lake, had been patched and sealed with new concrete. He had poured his final months of life and every last dollar into making this place strong enough to stand, strong enough to shelter me. On the third day, a car pulled up. Not a fancy car, but a late-model sedan that looked profoundly out of place on the overgrown lane. A man in a suit got out. He was slick, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He walked right up to the front door of the ice house, as if he owned the place. "Leo," he called out, "my name is Mark Trask. I'm with Lionsgate Development. I'd love to have a word with you." I remembered Mr. Davies' warning. Do not engage. I stayed silent, hidden in the shadows of the cavernous interior. "Look, kid," he said, his voice changing, the fake friendliness evaporating. "We know you're in there. We know your situation. Your stepmother told us everything. You're broke. You're alone. This place is a wreck. It's going to cost you a fortune in taxes and upkeep you don't have. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer. $250,000. Cash. You sign the papers, and you can walk away from this dump today and never look back. $250,000. The number hung in the air. It was more money than I could even comprehend. It was a new life. It was everything Carol said I'd never have. For a dizzying second, I saw it. A new apartment, a car, college. A clean break. Then I thought of my father's letters. I thought of his broken body in a hospital bed, using his last ounces of strength to write to me, to warn me. I thought of the love and care hidden in the reinforced beams above my head. This place wasn't a dump. It was a testament. It was the only piece of my father I had left. The anger returned, cold and clear. I walked to the door and stood in the opening, letting my eyes adjust to the light. Trask took a step back, surprised. "I'm not interested," I said. My voice didn't shake. He smirked. "Don't be a fool, kid. Your father was a fool. He was a sentimental carpenter who didn't know what he was sitting on. He died with nothing. You want to end up like him? Get off my property," I said. His smile vanished completely. "This isn't over. That offer has an expiration date. When winter hits and you're freezing in this barn, you'll be begging us to take it. And the offer will be much, much lower." He got back in his car and sped away, spitting gravel. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding. The first shot had been fired. I hadn't flinched. That night, I opened my father's journal. It was filled with his neat, blocky handwriting, page after page of notes, dates, and observations. He'd documented every phone call with Lion's Gate, every threat. He'd photographed the tire tracks of the truck that had delivered the faulty materials to his workshop just before the fire. He'd even recorded a phone call with Carol, where she inadvertently admitted to passing information to Trask. It was all there. A meticulous, damning indictment. My father hadn't just been trying to protect the land. He'd been building a case. He'd been gathering the ammunition for a war he knew he wouldn't live to fight himself. He had been preparing the battlefield for me. The package from Mr. Davies arrived a few days later, delivered by a local courier who gave me a curious look. Inside was the burner phone, a solar charger, and several thick, military-grade sleeping bags. There was also a cashier's check for a few $1,000s. A note from Mr. Davies was attached, from the trust. For supplies. Get a generator. Get wood stove. Winter is coming. We file next week. The next morning, I walked the 4 miles back into town. This time, I didn't feel like a lost kid. I felt like a man with a purpose. I walked into the Northwood General Store. It was one of those old stores that sold everything from groceries and hardware to fishing tackle and long underwear. An old man with a weathered face and a flannel shirt stood behind the counter. "Help you?" he asked, his eyes crinkling with a kind of gentle suspicion reserved for outsiders. "I need a generator," I said, "and a wood stove. A good 1 inch. He raised an eyebrow. "Big plans for the old ice house, then? Heard someone was camping out there." News traveled fast in a small town. "Just moving in," I said. The man's expression softened. "You must be Frank's boy." I was taken aback. "You knew my father?" "Knew him? Of course. Frank and I went to school together. He was a good man. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man. Broke my heart when I heard what happened. He stuck out a thick, calloused hand. "Name's George. Anything you need, you come see me." Frank was fighting for this town, whether folks knew it or not. That resort, it would kill this place. Turn it into some playground for rich folks. He sold me a generator and a heavy cast-iron stove at a discount, and even offered to deliver them in his pickup truck. As we loaded them into the back, he paused. "Your dad used to talk about you all the time," he said, not looking at me. "Said you were smart and stronger than you knew." Looks like he was right. That afternoon, driving back to the ice house in the passenger seat of George's rattling truck, something inside me shifted. The crushing weight of loneliness I'd been carrying for 2 years began to lift just a little. I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. I had Mr. Davies. I had George. And I had my father, his voice in the letters, his foresight in the reinforced walls, his legacy in my hands. Installing the wood stove was the hardest physical work I'd ever done. I had to figure out how to run the chimney pipe out through the thick, sawdust-packed wall without compromising the structure. I found my dad's old tool schematics in the journal, and, following his careful drawings, I managed it. It took me 2 full days of sweat and cursing. But when I finally lit the first fire, the feeling of accomplishment was immense. The stove was a black, iron heart in the center of the vast space. The first crackle of the kindling, the first puff of smoke up the chimney, the first wave of radiant heat pushing back against the deep, ancient cold, it was life. It was warmth. It was home. That night, for the first time, I didn't sleep in a cold, dusty corner. I pulled one of the new sleeping bags close to the stove, and I slept in the warm, orange glow, feeling safe. I was no longer just occupying the ice house. I was inhabiting it. I was turning my father's fortress into a home. A week later, Mr. Davies called on the burner phone. "We filed a lawsuit this morning," he said, "against Lionsgate Development, Mark Trask, and Caroline Miller." He used her full name, and it sounded alien, criminal. "For wrongful death, conspiracy, and industrial sabotage. We also filed an injunction to halt any development on the lake pending the outcome of the lawsuit. We're using your father's journal as the primary evidence." "What happens now?" I asked, my stomach twisting into a knot. "Now they fight back," he said. "It will get ugly. They will try to discredit your father. They will try to discredit you. They will try to paint you as a greedy, opportunistic kid. You have to be ready for that. Stay on the property. Stay quiet. And trust the process. Your father gave us the truth. The truth is a powerful weapon." The first snowfall came a few days after that. I woke up one morning to a world transformed. A thick, silent blanket of white covered everything: the trees, the ground, the roof of the ice house. The lake was a dark mirror reflecting the gray sky. The air was still and muffled. The beauty of it was absolute. I stood in the doorway, a mug of hot coffee in my hands, made on a hot plate powered by the generator, and watched my breath plume in the cold air. The winter was long and hard, but I was ready for it. I learned the rhythms of the land, the way the snow piled up, the way the ice on the lake groaned and cracked in the deep cold. I spent my days reinforcing the work my father had started, using the money he'd left me to buy lumber and supplies from George. I learned how to patch the roof. I learned how to wire a simple electrical circuit. I found a new kind of peace in the hard, physical labor, in the simple, honest fatigue at the end of the day. My hands, once soft, grew callous like my father's. The legal battle raged on, far away in a city courtroom. Mr. Davies would call with updates. Lionsgate's lawyers filed motion after motion to have the case dismissed. They accused my father of being an unstable, paranoid man. They produced a forged document, supposedly a sale agreement he had signed. But Mr. Davies, armed with my father's meticulous records, dismantled their lies one by one. The recorded phone call with Carol was the turning point. When it was played in a pre-trial hearing, their entire defense began to crumble. Carol, I learned, had been arrested. She faced charges of perjury and conspiracy. Trask was fired from Lionsgate as the company scrambled to distance itself from the scandal. The story of the small-town carpenter who had outsmarted a multi-million-dollar corporation from beyond the grave started to leak to the press. One afternoon in late spring, as the snow was finally beginning to melt and the first green shoots were pushing up through the cold earth, Mr. Davies called. His voice was different. It was light. "They want to settle, Leo," he said. "Settle. They're offering to drop their claim to the land and the mineral rights completely. In addition, they're offering a financial settlement for the damages to your father and to you. A significant 1 inch." He named a number that made my knees feel weak. It was more than a new life. It was a new world. "What about the lawsuit?" I asked. "The criminal charges?" "The district attorney is pursuing the case against Carol and Trask regardless of the civil settlement," he said. "This is about the land, about your future. The choice, as always, is yours. We can take this to trial, and we will likely win, but it could take years. Or we can accept this, and it's over. You've won. Your father has won." I looked out the office window. The ice was breaking up on the lake. The water was a brilliant, impossible blue. I thought about the long winter, about the quiet strength I had found in this place. I thought about George and the other townspeople who had slowly started to stop by, bringing a pie or offering to help chop wood, telling me stories about my dad. This place wasn't just a piece of property anymore. It was a community. It was my home. "We accept," I said, "on one condition. The ice house stands as strong as ever. But it's different now. There are windows set into the thick walls, letting in the light. The old machinery is still there, cleaned and preserved, a monument to a time gone by. But around it, the space is a home. There's a kitchen, a living area warmed by the wood stove, and a workshop where I've started to learn my father's craft, using a set of old tools George found for me that had belonged to my grandfather. The settlement money sits in a trust managed by Mr. Davies. It secured my future, but it didn't define it. My one condition for the settlement was that Lionsgate had to fund the creation of a local land trust, putting the entire shoreline of Blackwood Lake outside of my property into a permanent conservation easement. No resorts, no gated communities, just the lake, the trees, and the quiet, stubborn dignity of the wilderness. My father had been fighting not just for his land, but for the soul of the place. It felt right to finish that fight for him. Sometimes, I take my father's letters out of the green metal box and read them again. They're not just a story of betrayal and struggle. They are a story of a father's love, a fierce, protective, and meticulous love that reached across death itself to give his son a future. He didn't leave me a ruin. He left me a choice. He taught me that inheritance isn't about what you're given. It's about what you choose to build with it. It's about what you choose to protect. I look at my hands now, and I see his hands. I'm not just his son anymore. I'm the keeper of his legacy, the guardian of his fortress. Carol thought she was kicking me out. She thought she was sending me to a cold, worthless, forgotten place. And she was right. It was cold. It was forgotten. But it wasn't worthless. What I found inside that old ice house wasn't just a secret. It wasn't just the truth. It was myself. This whole journey, from that sterile kitchen to this warm, fire-lit home, has taught me one profound lesson. Sometimes the things that look like burdens are actually foundations. Sometimes the things that people discard as worthless are the only things with any real value. Home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you fight for. It's a place you build, board by board, memory by memory, choice by choice. And I know so many of you watching this have your own story about that. Maybe it wasn't a nice house. Maybe it was a promise you kept, a family business you saved, or just a part of yourself you refused to let the world break. Whatever your fortress is, I want you to know that protecting it is the most important work you will ever do. If this story meant something to you, if it resonated with a fight you've had in your own life, please consider subscribing. We're building a community here of people who understand that the most valuable things are never easy. And I want you to share your story in the comments below. Tell me, what is the worthless thing you were given that turned out to be the thing that saved you? I'll be reading every single one, because your story matters. We're in this together. Thank you for listening.